What happens when you mix a mountain of fabric scraps, a thrifted blanket, and tea-dyed fabric? Well, a gorgeous autumn jacket. This whole project started with only one single photo, which is this that I found on Pinterest. I love the boxy silhouette of this shape, and I was like, okay, I need to sit down and make this pattern, but I wanted to be sustainable, and instead of just going ahead and buying the fabric, I just wanted to upcycle. It was a challenge to make this jacket, but it's, as you could have seen from the previous clip, it was totally worth it because I really love that I have now a reversible jacket that I can just wear whenever I want. So let's dive into the video and let me show you how I made this jacket. Have fun! For this project I used lots of muslin scrap pieces. If you're inspired doing this, please wash the scrap pieces since we're all aware that muslin shrinks when washed. Then for the dye bath, I used a pack of black tea and a big sheet of washed muslin that I placed into the dye bath. I let the fabric sit for about 24 hours, then I let it dry and repeated the process again because I really wanted a rich color. As you can see, the colors for my fabrics choices started to match up nicely. For the bedding, I decided to go to my local secondhand and find some blankets that I could use. Bedding can be quite expensive, and the idea here was to use secondhand and scrap pieces as much as I could. Based on the Pinterest picture I showed you earlier, I drafted my first version of the autumn jacket to make my first mock-up. Since I drafted my moulage, I started using it for everything. I hardly even have to measure myself anymore, and most of the time there are just minor adjustments that I need to do in my mock-ups. If you don't have a moulage, aka a blueprint of your body, I made a full tutorial on how to make one linked in the description box below. Alright, I removed the neckline. I'm not sure what to think about it. Like, there's something wrong with the sleeve, for sure. Like, this is not it yet. Like, it doesn't match the style. I don't know why it puffed up here. I had to gather stitch because it wasn't fitting the armhole proper, but I like the shape of it. Maybe I will take in slightly here to give it a bit of a curve to make it more snatched, less boxy, I would say, but the fit is comfortable. I probably have enough space for my jumpers to wear underneath without without looking too big, I think. I mean, it's sitting comfortable. Just let's figure this out. I then went ahead with the adjustments that I believed it needed and printed the new pattern out. And as you can see, the second mock-up turned way better. The fit was better and the sleeves was fitting this mock-up way better as well. Once I had my pattern nailed to perfection, it was time to create my fabric. I cut out a 10 by 10 centimeter square pattern piece and start tracing it all on my scrap pieces. I honestly can't remember how many squares I actually ended up cutting, but all I know that at some point I did actually run out and had to make even more square pieces. I then started attaching the square pieces together, alternating between the colors. Once I had a big piece done that accommodates my pattern pieces, I lay the fabric onto the blanket and cut around it. Then I pinned the pieces together to prepare for the quilting process. Honestly, whenever I look at the fabric, I only see these two emojis together. I don't know why, but it just looks like it. To make my life easy, I just lined my footer to the seam line of the stitch line of the squares and followed it. This gave me the look of a square within the square. This project used a lot of thread, so I will recommend to have at least 2 to 3 spool of threads ready. Say I'm almost done with all the quilting, but I realized that I actually need to revisit my pattern pieces and cut them as a full piece, mainly because the quilting, I cannot fold it 2 times because it gets very thick, and that means my cutting will not be accurate. So it needs to be cut with a full-on pattern, otherwise there will be a lot of issues. Once I had the right amount of fabric for all the pattern pieces, it was time to put my pattern piece onto my quilt and start tracing the pattern onto the quilt using my favorite wax pen. Once traced, I then took my scissors and started cutting all the pieces. Here is an overview of all the pieces I cut so far. For the orange fabric, I just had to place the pattern pieces and cut as usual. I didn't quilt it. I then started pinning the front shoulder to the back shoulder, and once that's ironed, then the side seams. Once attached, I then started clipping the collar to the jacket and later the sleeves to the armhole. I didn't go into great details here since it was straightforward. I was just assembling the jacket together. I repeat the same steps for the orange fabric as well. I made about 2 rolls of bias tape from the leftover muslin that I washed. I started off by adding it onto my pockets. As you can see, I rubbed the bias tape first on the wrong side of the pocket, leaving about an inch on the top on either side, and stitched it in place. Once stitched, I then cut the side of the pocket to reduce bulk. I then folded the bias tape neatly inward to have a clean edge. Once that's done, I then folded the bias tape around the edges to hide the raw edges and stitched it in place. I repeated the same steps on the other 3 pockets. Once done, I then pinned the pocket onto the jacket and followed the stitch line. I repeat the same on the orange fabric as well, and as you can see, now I had 2 jackets. On the orange collar, I added fusible tape to give it some structure and for it to hold its shape. Once I had both jackets done, it was time to assemble them into one. I placed the orange jacket onto the quilt jacket, wrong side facing each other. Then I start clipping the edges together. This was just a placeholder first, just to check if everything was aligned. Then I took my bias tape and went all around the jacket, pinning from the orange side first and stitching in place with my sewing machine. Since I wanted a clean finished look, I decided to hand stitch the bias tape all around the edges and sleeve. The last thing that I had to do now was to add the buttons to the jacket. For this I ended up using these metal snap fasteners because I will be able to reversibly wear the jacket. I would suggest to clip them first just to check if the idea is right. I used my front pattern piece with the button markings onto the jacket and transferred the holes. I personally wish I had done this step before assembling the jacket, but hey, lesson learned. Using the smallest bit of my hole puncher, I punched through the markings. I have only done this on one side first. Alright, just a quick explanation here. I just, as you can see both from the previous clip, I put the holes through. Now I just overlapped it as much as I needed because I know that's 1.5 and the other side needs to also be 1.5. And then now I'm just gonna go through a pen and mark it through so everything is gonna be nicely aligned. Now that I transferred the markings, I was now able to punch the holes on the other side. Now I'm taking the female socket through the fabric and then place the cap on top, making sure the cap with the writing on it is facing upward. Then I placed the point tool onto the cap and hammered it in place. For the other side, I placed the male cap through the fabric and placed the stud on top. Using the concave tool and the base, I hammered it in place as well. It is very weird to call it female and male cap, but as far as I understood, these are the terms for fasteners. I repeated the steps on the rest of the holes. And with this being said, this was the final step and the jacket is now done. I love how this jacket turned out. I love that I have now a reversible jacket that resembles my favorite season of the year, and I'm even more happy that I could reduce some of my fabric scraps I had and the usage of secondhand items to create this. What do you guys think? Would you make this jacket as well using waste? Let me know in the comment section because I'm curious.